Hello, everybody, and welcome to The Scares That Shaped Us, a podcast about horror writers and the stories that made them. I'm your host, Matthew Jackson, and we have a good one for y'all this week. Josh Malerman is here to talk about Incidents Around the House, the scariest book of 2024, and his pretty much lifelong love affair with Twilight Zone, the movie. It's the first time we've covered an anthology movie on the show, and Josh wanted to talk a lot about the elasticity and versatility of the horror genre. So that's a great discussion. We also talk a lot about buying the ticket and taking the ride when you engage with a genre story. We talk about why Incidents Around the House is so damn scary. We talk about a lot of great things. It's a wonderful conversation. It's also a really long conversation. So we're going to get to it quickly. I'm not going to do any recommendations this week. I'm just going to let you guys enjoy a really nice chat between Josh and I, and hopefully you enjoy it. I'm also recording this, to be honest with you, on election night, and a lot of anxiety in the air, so I might not be thinking as clearly as I otherwise would coming to you guys. So we're going to skip the recommendations. We're going to go right to the conversation. It's a nice, long, meaty one. I hope you have fun with it. Here is our interview with the great Josh Malerman. Joining us this week on The Scares That Shaped Us is one of the most prolific and exciting horror writers working right now. You will know him from Bird Box, Goblin, Inspection, Mallory, Pearl, Daphne, Spin a Black Yarn, and this year's scariest horror novel I've read in a long fucking time, Incidents Around the House. Josh Malerman, welcome to the show.
Hello and hello everybody. Let's get scary.
Yes, well, this is probably not a very insightful question, but I just kind of wanted to start by asking you about the response to Incidents, because when I read it, I told everybody it's the scariest thing I've read all year and maybe in the last like 5 years. And people seem to agree with me about that. So I know obviously as a horror writer, it's your goal to scare us, but what's it been like having that kind of response to this one?
Okay, it, it feels unbelievable because gosh, I could talk about this alone for an hour because if you think about like the great comedians, right? Typically like a guy like George Carlin and I even say like Robin Williams, like there's a sense of like a social message as well or something. There's something wider than just the comedy, right? But I would guess that following a show George Carlin backstage, the thing that would thrill him, he'd be glad he got his message out there, but the thing that would thrill him would be, I made them laugh.
Hmm.
And I feel the same way with incidents. It's like, yeah, it's about many things. And, my parents are divorced and it's about not these two don't, I mean, not these two are not divorced in the book, but you understand what I mean. A troubled family, but every family is troubled and etc. So it's about many things, but you scared someone. There's like a bizarre root pride in that. Like that's like where you started from is wanting to do that. Like George Carlin, the first he wanted to make someone laugh, and then it grew into what he grew into. And so it's the greatest feeling. It like makes me feel like, oddly enough, it's a book narrated by a child, and as a young person, I wanted to scare people in the same way that I got scared by what we're going to talk about, the movie today. And so for incidents to do that feels like this incredible, like circular accomplishment or something. It's the greatest feeling.
Well, one of the things I think that's kind of key to its success is you mentioned the troubled family dynamic, and obviously this is all narrated by a little girl, but we obviously we feel so strongly that something is wrong with her parents, and you have these wonderful asides where her parents sit on her bed and tell her things when they think she's sleeping, so they get these kind of confessional moments, and you can feel not just Bella's fear, but you can feel mommy and daddo's fear. And then so you have these like parallel tracks of fear happening, and then the moment that the book hit another level for me, it was already creepy and delightful and I wanted to keep going, but the moment that I went, oh my God, and it like hit me really in my core was when Bella realizes for the first time in her life that her parents don't actually know what to do.
Yes.
Like she has that realization of like, oh God, they can't fix this. They have no idea how to fix this. And as a relatively new parent and as a kid as someone who was a kid who I had all these sort of bugaboos about scary things in my life, and I was always asking my dad about, can this really get me, and how can it get me? To have that moment sink in for that character was just so it just really got me down in my core. Did writing this dredge up those kind of feelings from your own childhood?
Yes, 100%. 100%. And there's an outline written on the wall, like on the other side of this computer. I wouldn't call it an outline. It's like 12 sentences about what this book could be or something written on the wall right here. And essentially what it's saying is nobody knows what to do. Nobody, not the church, friends, acquaintances, ghost hunter, occultist, doctors, and parents. Nobody knows what to do. And that's like what, Josh, as you sit down and write this book, that's what you want the reader to feel like is that, oh my God, I want mommy and daddo to be as scared as Bella is because I imagine myself, if I have a 8-year-old daughter and I go into her room and I see that thing in there, and I see what she calls other mommy, that thing in the room, I don't know exactly what I would do. I don't know. I honestly don't know what I would do. Like, I don't know that I would grab my daughter and run. I don't know I would probably be like, run to me. Come here. Like, I'm not entering the room. You run to me. Like, I honestly, so when I started to think about that, I think there's some, number one, there's obviously the illusion when you're a child that like your parents would be able to face this. They would be able to make sense of it. They would be able to defeat this, all that kind of stuff. And then there's also this weird other thing where I think that it's almost like we're trained to expect a book parent to be able to do that as well. And I think that like I've gotten I don't read reviews, but I get tagged and stuff, you know what I mean? And I've
Yeah.
seen people that are like, oh, I don't like mommy at all. And she's this and she's that. I'm like, and I'm thinking, you don't like mommy? Like she doesn't know what to do any better than anyone else. Like this is a troubled family. But then if every family is troubled, now throw in other mommy, and how would anyone behave? So to
Yeah.
me, mommy Ursula is we're catching her at a weird moment in her life. And you know, she begs a question to me of like a parent is supposed to be a good parent at all ages for their kid, right? You're like
Yeah.
supposed, but do they have to be? Like, could my mom have been a bad parent when I was 4 and a brilliant one when I was 14? And can she be a brilliant one now, but maybe we were drifting when I was in college, when I was 19, 20? And so haven't we maybe just caught Ursula at a moment where, yeah, she's not up to the task of this 8-year-old daughter thing, but throw in other mommy. And that's what I think when I say there's this strange expectation of not only, as you said, judging up the memories of being a kid and thinking your parents can handle it. There's also this sense that the book parent should be able to handle this, or the movie parent should be able to handle this. Well, not in this book. They can't. They don't know. They do not know what to do any more than Bella does. In fact, I wouldn't say Bella knows more than anyone else because she doesn't know what to do either. But I mean, they're all on equal footing. 8 years old, from 8 years old to occultist to ghost hunter. Nobody knows.
Yeah, well, and it has that feeling of like I love the bit where they get the guard dogs and the dog trainers are like, "Hey, these dogs are supposed to do this specific thing," and the whole time Bella is sitting around going like, "I don't know what these dogs are supposed to do." It doesn't seem like they're doing anything other
Yeah.
than sitting here, and it has this great feel to it. Like it's almost like if Elmore Leonard wrote a possession story because it's so like I talk a lot about the difference between stories that happen in this linear structural way and stories that just kind of unfold. in the sense that you really can't tell. It's not that anything feels unnatural or unpredictable about it, but you don't. It creates this very natural sense of, oh God, what are they going to do now?
Yeah,
And oh, of course they're not done with this yet. And you mentioned one of my favorite things to talk about, which is expectations in genre fiction of characters, especially horror, of characters behaving a certain way.
yeah.
Like we love to play the game as horror fans, the same game that people say, well, in Lord of the Rings, why didn't the Eagles just fly the ring to Mount Doom? We do that with horror all the time. We for some reason go to this place where we're like, if I was a 100% rational human being acting in this moment without an ounce of fear, this is what I would do. And I'm always beating the drum of like, but this is not a reasonable situation for anyone to be in. So how can you expect to behave rationally? It reminds me of when I saw the 2014 Godzilla movie that Gareth Edwards made. I was walking out of the theater and there were some people in front of me that were talking about like, I don't understand why all those characters kept turning around and looking in awe at Godzilla. I would have been running. I wouldn't have looked back for anything. And I was like, it's Godzilla. You don't think you would stop for a second and look at Godzilla if Godzilla suddenly was real and in front of you?
Yeah.
And I love books that play with that, and I feel like Incidents Around the House does it so well with that the sense of like this is not rational for anyone. This is not there is no expectation of behavior in this.
Yeah, my fiance Allison always tells me that like she's more scared of like a stalker, something like that, kind of like standing outside the house looking through the window than she is of like a demon or something. And I'm like, okay, but what if the demon was like present? Like you're saying that based on the idea of the two things, and one is quote unquote real, and the other you believe is not.
Hmm.
So it's very easy in that case to be like, yeah, I'm afraid of man over a monster, right? Because the man actually exists. But in the story, in the movie, and maybe even in reality, the demon does exist. Now, what are you more afraid of? Are you really more afraid of the dude outside that you could possibly outrun or beat up or outsmart or whatever? Or are you scared of the pile of like tanned flesh, breathing in the corner of the kitchen that you like when you turn on the kitchen light? You're really more scared of the guy outside. So it is us, it's like even in discussing these things, there's the idea of like the suspension of disbelief, like even in just discussing it, because you can't have that I can't have a discussion about a goat, whether the demon or ghost is scary to a friend, if he's coming from a place of I don't believe in demon or ghosts.
Yeah.
And so that for me, I'll see the reaction to incidents has been off the charts. In fact, it's the best. I think it's the best release I've ever had. I know it is actually. But I'll see some people go, oh, people said this was scary, and no, it's not. And I'm like, that's fine. I mean, of course, that's fine. But in my experience with the genre, what I do is I believe the story for the duration of the work of art. I believe it. I believe every element of it. And the brilliant ones, I kind of believe it for days following too. Where like that thing that got under the skin like is still there. And I don't know if you like this movie or not, but and a lot of my friends didn't, but Paranormal Activity messed me up. And I walked out of that theater. I'm talking 3, 4, 5 days. I was renting a room at a friend's house at the time. 4 or 5 days of the lights on. I mean, that stuck with me. And part of that is, and this is the same with comedy, right? Is you believe it while you experience it. Because otherwise, then none of this is scary. No, I mean, if you're not, then literally none of this is scary. And like not a single horror movie that I've seen is scary if I don't believe it while it's happening, because it's just a two-dimensional screen or it's words on a page.
That's a really good way to put it, and that's something I'm going to carry with me whenever I encounter family members or friends who, oh, you like horror stuff? I don't like horror because none of it's actually scary. And I'm like, well, you have to engage with it
Yeah.
in some like the bellwether for that kind of behavior in my experience has been The Exorcist, where people always say Exorcist isn't scary because I don't believe in demonic possession.
Yep.
And I'm like, okay, well, but you believe that a parent could have something awful medically or psychologically happen to their child that they can't solve, right? Because that's kind of the core fear of The Exorcist. It's not so much that it's a demon, it's that this awful thing is happening to this 12-year-old girl and no one seems to be able to solve it and she doesn't deserve it and it's awful. So I'm glad you mentioned Allison because I wanted to talk about Bella for a second because you Allison made you a Bella. You have a Bella in your house.
You
Um,
know, now that you said that, I really wish she was sitting right next to me. But
yeah. Well, you have for listeners who don't know, like there's a Chucky doll behind Josh, and it would be
there,
great to have Chucky on one side and Bella on the other.
okay,
Um,
noted. I am going to set that up.
they're sort of dressed similarly, actually. Now that I
Yeah, and they have similar hair too. Like they have a
they
similar hair.
do. So, and I've noticed. I mean, the Bella thing was made for like a book launch event that you did, right?
Oh my God, Allison, dude. So for it started with Bird Box, where, gosh, I'll try to make this as concise as possible. As you know, I'm in a rock band called the High Strung.
Yes.
Toured the country for years, and we're still in a band, and we're still working on a new album. And so when I was originally told for Bird Box, now you can go on a book tour and do a book launch, and I'm like, oh, what does that mean? And they were like, well, you go and you stand at a podium and read. I'm like, oh boy, no, 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 no. I'm like, listen to my voice. I don't have Vincent Price voice. You know what I mean? I'm not gonna be, Mallory stands in the kitchen thinking, I'm not, or more like,
Hmm.
Mallory, stands in the, And I was like, no, 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 hold on. Allison, what can we do here? And fortunately, Bird Box naturally is equipped with a prop, which is the blindfold. So we blindfolded the entire audience. Allison and I are like making faces at each other during the reading. The whole room is blindfolded. I'm playing scary music while Allison's reading, and friends, a girl played the violin, and someone played Tom, and it was amazing. The next book that comes out, Black Mad Wheel, we're like, uh-oh, this one doesn't have blindfolds. What do we do? And so began Allison building sets, getting like props, thinking in terms of venue. And so this has led to incidents around the house. It was an 8-person troupe where I think we acted out or we read, but in a set and costume way, like 8 scenes. And our we have a troupe we call Wow Town, and the member Jim Byrne, he wrote 4 songs for the thing and scored the entire hour-long show he scored. And that by the way, there's an album of that called Sounds Around the House on
Hmm.
online, and it's freaking awesome, dude. Allison though is like she's our star. She's our ace. The props, the costumes, she always plays the monster. She played other mommy. And she built Bella from scratch. I'm talking like G.I. Joe figures, how they have the rubber bands inside for their joints and everything and the hooks, and Bella's like that, but life size.
Yeah.
Like it's not just like, static doll or even like wire that you can just bend. I mean, it is joints, like balls between the joints, like and all over through her entire body and everything. And yeah, Bella now just sits in our house staring horrified. She's like literally in the living room right over there. And I'll tell you what, man, when you go to the bathroom late at night and stuff, I know she's there. But you kind of look over and it's dark and she's sitting there and you can kind of see her looking horrified at you. And you're like, oh yeah, that's sweet. Allison made that. But also like maybe she is seeing something right now. Like maybe I don't have to use the bathroom right now.
Well, this was what I wanted to ask about because you cut a couple of promos with her. Like you and Allison puppeted Bella around and put some videos on social media of her just in your house. Um, and I was thinking about it the other day and I was like, that's an interesting way to like continue to engage with a book that you did that's already out in the world.
Yeah.
Like, do you feel like Incidents is just because Bella's there? Is it lingering longer than the others? Is it taking new shapes in your head even now?
Yeah, what a great question. What an int that's I feel like that's such like an artistic question because rather than considering Bella just some prop that you used, like yeah, or a tool. Like yeah, she's 100%. Yeah, again, she's so realistic and she looks horrified. Allison actually went talk. This is an amazing answer to your question. Allison put some like redesign her eyes a little to look a little less scared because this girl's just sitting in the other room, like staring as if she's like seeing other mommy, horrified. And we almost felt bad for her. Like, could we like soften her features a little? Like maybe she's okay, you know? And like, so Allison actually went and kind of like adjusted her eyes a little bit. And but there's also when for the inspection reading, Allison built giant paper mache heads for the alphabet boys.
Hmm.
And there's a mask for Smoke from Unburied Carol. There's hats for Goblin right here. There's the Sam Hatton varsity jacket hanging here from the Daphne reading. There all over this house there are props from like these readings. So, but yes, I think in the same way that I like to have the books I've read shelved in the office so when I walk in, it sort of like inspires me to add to that pile.
Hmm.
Same way, to answer what you brought up, you see Bella, you're thinking about the book, and you're thinking about maybe it'd be cool if I filmed her like this. Like just right now, I'm thinking right now because you said Bella and Chucky kind of look alike. I'm thinking of maybe doing those two together, something with them.
Yeah.
Like, and so there is a sense, and not in a I mean, I guess it is in a promo way, but more in just an excited to still play with her way and
Yeah.
to still play with the idea. Like Bella's in the house. Let's do something with this.
So I was realizing when I went to look up your bibliography to make sure I got all the titles right, that this year is 10 years for you since Bird Box. So a decade of publishing horror, lots of stuff produced in that decade. And selfishly, because it's my show and I've got you here, I wanted to ask about one particular. I knew you from Bird Box and then read Daphne when Daphne was out and was a fan of that. And so I started going back through other stuff and I just pulled up like the ebook thing on my library's website and was like, what's available? What can I find? And I was looking at synopses and I read the jacket copy for Black Mad Wheel and went, "Oh, that sounds cool as shit. What what is this gonna be?" And I like Bird Box. I love Daphne. Black Mad Wheel, I think, made me a Josh Malerman fan for life. And so
Wow.
I just want to kind of ask you, what do you remember about how that book came together in your head?
It started as a novella. And I've only done that like twice. I think I've gone the opposite a few times where it was a novel that I squashed down to a novella. But it started as a novella called Nurse Ellen, and it was pretty much the same story. Like just I mean, in terms of arc and Philip and Ellen and the bandmates and everything, but it was like a third of the length or something. And Bird Box came out and I was talking to HarperCollins at the time. It was HarperCollins. I was talking to them about all the different ideas and da da da, and they loved Black Man Wheel. They love Nurse Ellen. So it was my first time ever like expanding a smaller idea, and I was worried that it was going to just feel like this small idea that was ballooned. But no, I feel like the book could be even twice as long, not when I read it now. And so that was a Black Man Whale was an interesting lesson for me in terms of like where a story can go. Because like
Mhm.
it's tempting to be like, oh, I wrote a short story, that's it. But is that it? And that happened with this one. So yeah, I mean, there was one, I wouldn't say negative thing, but they moved a lot slower than I do. Echo and HarperCollins. And so Bird Box comes out in 14 and Black Man Wheel doesn't come out till 17.
Mhm.
In those 3 years, I wrote 6 or 7 novels, and I had already had 12 beforehand before Bird Box gets published. So I'm like moving a mile a minute, and they just move slower. They're just like they don't, there's sort of a I think Bird Box is maybe the only horror novel they've done. Maybe I'm wrong. But they would say things like, oh, you could, rent a cabin and drink wine and rewrite Black Man. I'm like, whoa, 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 whoa. No, 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 no. I'm gonna have this for you in like a month. I'm gonna have this rewrite done. Like, let's go, let's go, let's go, And that was the one time that I worked with someone where like the pacing was like different. That
Yeah.
didn't affect the book at all. But in terms of my own life, I was starting to lose my mind. I was like, come on, let's put this freaking thing out already. And I saw someone online wrote, does, with Bird Box, does Malerman only have one book in him? And I'm like, oh my. And in my office, I have like crates full of novels, and I'm like losing my mind. But finally, it came out. The reading was so awesome. My bandmates, we wrote, the song, I think it's called Be Here. I think that's the name of it in the book.
Hmm.
And that's the Dane's big hit.
Yeah.
And my bandmates and I like played it live, like we wrote it and everything. We have a recording of it, and we played it before the reading, and dude, it was freaking awesome. That's another thing. It gave me a chance to write about bandmates. I've
Yeah.
been best friends with these guys since we were 19. We've been in a band really in some form or another since we were 19. I'm 49 now. So I mean, these are like, and we're working on a new album. So to have a chance, I want to write another book about like them, or you know what I mean, like that kind of thing. And I don't know what that means yet, but yeah. And then there's a short story. What's it called? It's called Lime, and it's about a boy in the late 50s in Detroit who in like on the tree in his backyard discovers like weapons growing. So like knives are growing in the tree, and he'll
Mm.
pluck one and then go out and stab someone. And then there's hammers, and he plucks one and goes out and kills someone. There's body bags, that grow on the tree outside. And all while he's doing it, the Danes are his favorite band, like playing on the radio the whole time. And that's like a fun thing for me or something to be able to like use the band still.
Yeah, well, I mean, you have that shared universe thing in general in your work, and that actually is a nice lead in to what we're here to talk about today, because this is a show about foundational, I call them foundational fears. Um, and your choice for your foundational fear is really interesting because it's the first anthology film we've gotten to do. And it's Twilight Zone, the movie from 1983, directed by Steven Spielberg, John Landis, George Miller, and Joe Dante. It was my first time going back to this movie in probably, gosh, I don't know, 15 years. It's been a really long time. And man, it hit me in, in ways that I had sort of forgotten about. But for you talked about this like this was really a horror root for you. So, what was your first experience with Twilight Zone the movie?
Okay, this was my first horror movie ever. I was, I think, 10 or 11, and I was playing basketball with my cousin, my brothers, and my cousin, and we were at my cousin's house. I think mom and everyone were there, but we were playing basketball. I don't know what I said. I don't know. I must have expressed interest in comics that lean this way or something. But my uncle said to me, he's like, Josh, I think that you particularly would love this movie, and he had a VHS. And I really wish I could go back and see what did I say for him to say that? What was I saying? Like, you're all a bunch of rotting skeletons. I make a shot over someone. I'm like, whatever, suck my blood. I have no idea what I was saying. So I go in, I watch this thing, and oh my God, it was like a feeling of yeah, like coming home or arriving where you're supposed to arrive. Like, what an introduction, because, and I don't want to cover everything in one sentence here, but what an introduction to the genre, because it taught me from word one how elastic the genre can be. There's
Yeah.
four main segments and an awesome opening wraparound, like one of the best openings ever. Four completely different segments from social, commentary to even that horror can be warm in a heartstring way and
Hmm.
sad to the imagination unchained with Anthony to the creature feature with the airplane.
Yeah.
And, I mean, it's literally it was like a going to horror school in 90 minutes. And it
Yeah.
said to me that like none of these stories were similar. None of them, there wasn't a through line except for Burgess Meredith's voice. There wasn't a through line. The styles were different, they looked different, and it was like, but they were all of a piece. And now, flash forward years later, I've written 40 novels now, and oftentimes in interviews, someone will say, like, none of your two books are alike. it's like a totally different style. It's like it's as if a different guy directed each one. And I say to myself, like, that's because the Twilight Zone the movie. No, because that's how that I was introduced to this genre, is that it's okay. This all counts as horror, even if they don't resemble each other at all.
Yeah, that's a really interesting way of looking at it. And I mean, it's one of the great things about horror anthologies in general. Um, but I wanted to transition to talk about the opening, which posted something on Twitter, I think last night.
Yeah.
It was just a picture of Dan Aykroyd, and you said, "This is my first movie monster," and that seems, if you haven't seen Twilight Zone the movie, that seems like a crazy thing to say.
Hmm.
But when you watch that, it is still one of the scariest opening sequences in any horror film, and it hits you on that kid level because it's such a fun little. For those who don't know, the opening scene of Twilight Zone the movie is Albert Brooks and Dan Aykroyd in a car, and they're driving alone on a lonesome stretch of highway at night, and the tape player breaks in the car, so they start talking about the Twilight Zone and the scary stories they remember. And Dan Aykroyd says, "You want to see something really scary?" And then he does a thing, which if you haven't seen the movie, I won't tell you the thing, but just trust me, watch it. Even if you just like go to YouTube and pull up that one sequence, just watch that sequence. It's great. It has that thing where it hits you as like a 10-year-old, where you're like, ooh, what a fun little creepy jump scare. But as an adult, and particularly as an adult who likes long drives and who really doesn't mind long stretches of midnight road, um, it has that. It's John Landis directed it, and it's the good thing in the Twilight Zone he directed. We'll talk about the other thing in a minute, but uh, he has that way of sort of using comedy to kind of lull you into this sense of like, oh, these just two guys having a nice time. It's not.
Wow. You know what? I didn't until you just said that. I didn't even realize the similarity between the opening of American Werewolf in London
Yeah,
with you guys crossing the, the moors, whatever, and like, and like making jokes and da da da, and like intelligent like dudes, and then encountering something really freaking scary.
yeah. It is. I think a hallmark of good John Landis horror is the way that he uses, because he was known, like, before this, like he was the guy who made the Blues Brothers, and that's
Yeah.
that's part of why Dan Aykroyd is in this. So like he has this way when he's at his best of just getting you into that mode of like, oh, we're just talking. We're just having a nice time. This could really go anywhere. These guys could be going to a bar to pick up women. Like we don't know.
Yeah.
And then it just takes that sudden, and it also, like, he directed the Michael Jackson Thriller video, which
Yeah.
has a similar turn in it.
A
That's
similar turn in that too.
and
Wow.
it's wonderful. I love. And so you mentioned that, and I don't know if there are direct parallels in your work anywhere. Like, nothing's coming to mind, but like you mentioned, that's your first movie monster. So, um, what did that do for you? I mean, you mentioned it all feels like coming home, but I'm trying to imagine a young kid never seen a horror movie before, and that is your first scare ever in a movie. So like,
Yeah.
how does that hit you now?
Oh my God. Well, because I watched it, like I actually watched it somewhat recently with Allison, but I watched it last night for today, so to make sure that it was like super fresh. And one thing that I had sort of overlooked was Albert Brooks turning the lights off. Like,
Oh
because
yeah, yeah,
oddly enough, he's the one that's like, hey, well, what happened? Oh, well, look at that gravel pit. We hit a bump, and turns the lights off. And knowing what we know about Dan Aykroyd, watching Dan Aykroyd react, they say, hey, come on, come on, come on, come on, turn the lights on, and then he turns the lights on, and Dan Aykroyd's, oh, geez, and you're wondering, wait, was he really freaked out by the lights being out or no? Like, was he just playing the part of a guy that would be freaked out? I, you keep in mind also, so 83, had I seen Dan Aykroyd before? Because Ghostbusters is later. Had I seen Dan Aykroyd before I saw, because that would be key to this, because not only would it have the scene upend itself, but my understanding of like a movie star would have been upended. Here's Dan Aykroyd, this funny guy, you know, turned around. Albert Brooks is just naturally funny, and what they're saying is funny, but the whole time there's this dread. You know the book, I'm Thinking of Ending Things?
Hmm.
And the first half of that book or whatever all takes place in just a car. It's nothing like what we're describing, but that sense of like they're just having a conversation and it's so like unsettling. And right away, even Albert Brooks is funny and Dan Aykroyd's like they're like loose and da da da, but it's not like horrifying music is playing, but there's just this sense of like, oh, wait a minute, where are these guys driving into, right? And they're driving into the Twilight Zone, right?
Yeah.
And yeah, so I think if that, I mean, at the time, it was just so scared. I mean, I couldn't even like feel my body, and it was so awesome. And but now it's more like, hey, Josh, it's okay. You don't have to like, you know, hey, let's let it breathe for a second. Let's let it breathe. Let's let it breathe, and then boom, it's okay. We don't have to telegraph the scare, even though again, Albert Brooks turning the lights off. There's something that says something scary could happen here, right? But it wasn't like telegraphed the way that like a woman like hears a sound and is walking through the house in the dark. It wasn't like that.
Yeah. So breaking down the segments now, we have four. That's the wraparound, and it pays off again at the end. But we have four segments in the main film, I guess, and like three of them are remakes of classic Twilight Zones. But the first one is an original thing that's sort of loosely based on some Twilight Zone concepts that John Landis wrote. And this is the part where we have to be dark for a second. Like, yes, this is a segment starring Vic Morrow as a racist man who is sort of magically teleported back into other great moments in racism throughout history. Like he goes back to Nazi Germany. He's captured by the KKK. He goes to Vietnam. Um, it is the segment where famously there was an accident filming with a helicopter, and Vic Morrow and two young child actors were tragically killed. And if you want to know more about that, it does contain some graphic content and it is upsetting. Jay Cheel did a great episode of Cursed Films on Shudder about that whole saga that is very much worth looking at. And we're not gonna like relitigate that whole case on this podcast because that's not what we're here to do. But just acknowledging terrible tragedy. But while he was still with us, I think Vic Morrow did some great work in this segment because it's not a segment that I particularly like, but he is so compelling in it. I don't know
Oh
how
yeah,
you feel about the segment.
oh, 100%. A lot of the time when I see even a movie from that era, when I see movies with like slurs or whatever, I think like you didn't need to have that,
Yeah,
you didn't need to have that language. And then and I understand when people are like, oh, but it's the character. It's like, yeah, okay, I get it. But I just to me it's like you could still describe a bigot and a total asshole without actual slurs or this or that.
yeah,
In this case, I think it might be the only case I can think of right now where, well, in terms of what we're like a horror movie or something, where it's almost like I needed to hear him say all that for him to then go through what he goes for me to see to be like and want him to go through what he goes through after that. Like my God, I don't even know what I thought at 10. I don't even know. I probably didn't even understand what any of those words meant at 10.
yeah,
To me, I was probably just like, he's yelling. You know what I mean? Like, and the guys at the other table are upset that he's yelling, and then he's mad at why is this guy mad at her? I didn't understand, but I understand now. And for for him, I mean, it really opens it with him saying this Jewish guy stole his job, essentially, or got the promotion. But there's interesting stuff because the friends are like, yeah, but hasn't he also been there longer than you?
yeah,
And then he's like, oh, I mean, yeah, who cares? But I'm better than him, And, okay, but in other words, didn't the Jewish guy actually deserve the promotion, And they're trying to sort of mitigate what their friends' total abject racism. And I'm Jewish, or at least born that way. So there is something like wildly cathartic about him stepping out of that bar and then he's suddenly a Jew in Nazi Germany. Like, you wouldn't wish that on anybody. But in the context of the Twilight Zone, you're like, oh man. And again, 10 years old to see this angry guy. I didn't fully, I mean, again, that's the one segment I didn't fully understand as a kid.
Yeah.
But to see this guy get, I don't know if it's comeuppance necessarily, but being forced to see how he's wrong. And
Yeah.
we don't get that resolved, probably likely because Vic Morrow died or because John Landis didn't write that resolve in there. But yeah, so I don't know. We could probably move on from this one, but I do think that in hindsight, watching it last night, I was like, man, this segment's like intense.
It
And I
is.
yeah,
You can sense that little bit of sort of John Landis like schlock provocateur in the use of the language, but it does. I think Vic Morrow has an added soul that goes into it, and I think you're right. I think we can move on to at least somewhat happier stories. The second story up is Kick the Can, which is a remake of a classic Twilight Zone. It stars Scatman Crothers, the great Scatman Crothers from The Shining and a bunch of other stuff, as a guy who is essentially like a traveling sorcerer of sorts. Like he's in this old folks' home, and all the old people are going, "Man, I wish I could dance again. I wish I could go out and play again. I wish I could pretend to be Douglas Fairbanks again." And through a sort of ritualistic game of kick the can late one night, they actually do revert to children. And this is the one Steven Spielberg directed. And interestingly, I read last night he was originally going to do The Monsters Are Due on Maple Street and changed it to this, which is a much more like wistful, bittersweet story rather than like the pure paranoia that Monsters on Maple Street is. Um, I it's a little too saccharine for me, I feel like, but
yeah,
it's what really works is the turn it takes when he tells all these old people who are now children, well, hey, you're kids now, you get to live a life over again. You just get to start over. And they all go, well, wait, what does that mean for the scariest part was when one of the kids goes, wait, does that mean that I'll have to watch everyone I love die again? I don't want to do that.
yeah.
Um, it's very classic Spielbergian wistful genre filmmaking, and I think it's solid. I don't love it as much as I do the other two that we're going to talk about. But how do you feel about Kick the Can?
As a kid, I think I thought it was mostly boring.
Yeah,
But the moment that was so harrowing to me, even as a kid, was when when the one guy's still young at the end in the window, and the friend steps forward, he's like, I want to go with you. Take me with you.
yeah,
And that moment was just like, even as a kid, I was like, oh man, like this old guy he missed out on this opportunity or something. But
yeah,
maybe not. And I don't want to ruin it for anyone, but Scamman Crothers kind of indicates that maybe he didn't miss out at the end. But yeah, it was to me, it was more like, yeah, I mean, I don't think I could ever say it better than you did, a traveling sorcerer. And again, I'm 11, 10 years old, and seeing this guy is like, here, we play this game and we become kids. I was like, whoa. You know what I mean? Like, this is unbelievable. And remember, this is on the heels of Dan Aykroyd and Vic Morrow, right? So
yeah,
now we're starting, the movie's starting to build now. It's starting to compound numerous emotions, the Dan Aykroyd thing scared you so bad that I'm on edge for the rest of this movie. And so, yeah, a little heartstringy. The music is super interesting in that one. And I read that it wasn't John Williams. It's God, what is his name? He's another famous
Jerry
dude.
Goldsmith.
Yeah, Here Goldsmith. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
And and for something about that particular, well, the final segment too, but that particular episode, the music is really interesting and it like stuck. Like when I was watching it last night, I remember that music from the first time I saw it.
yeah.
And that meant something to me last night. I'm like, But overall, Yeah, too a little too saccharine, a little too sweet, a little. I would love to have seen if Spielberg did the monsters to do on Maple Street. That
Yeah.
would have been badass.
Yeah, we keep waiting for Spielberg to just go full horror, and he keeps saying that maybe he will, and it hasn't happened yet. But we're still waiting. We still got time. Um,
Oh, it's like a dream of, oh, I'm sure of all of ours, but it's a dream of mine that he decides to go back with one of my books.
can you say which one, or can you?
Oh no, I know any of them. No, meaning like
Oh, okay,
I
okay.
want like this, I want him to be like, I'm gonna make a horror story again, and then he's like, hey, calls up.
Like
I
what?
would make a full-blown horror, movie.
I'm trying to think what of your books in my head is the most Spielbergian, and I think because of the child component to it, I think Incidents Around the House feels right to me.
Yeah, me too. I think that would be the one or something. Yeah.
Yeah. Um, okay, so I know we've been a little lukewarm on the first two segments, but y'all, if you haven't seen Twilight Zone the movie, just know you might not feel the first two, but the back half of this movie is just all hits, no skips.
Yeah.
Two
Yeah.
bangers from, and what's interesting about this is because of what happened with Vic Morrow, and the tragedy that unfolded there. John Landis actually shot his segment first, and then everyone else came in later and did theirs. And according to Joe Dante, because all of that was going on, and everyone was preoccupied and dealing with that awful thing that happened, it freed up Joe Dante and George Miller, who were then not really Hollywood guys yet. Like Joe Dante was making Gremlins, but he hadn't like fully he hadn't fully crossed over yet into the big time creature guy. And George Miller was known for the stuff he had made in Australia. It sort of freed them up to just kind of go crazy with their segments. And
Wow.
and that's you can absolutely feel that in Joe Dante's, which is a remake of an episode called It's a Good Life, that is about a little boy in a small town who has discovered that he has the ability to wish for anything and it comes true. But because he's a little kid, this makes him very dangerous, because if he doesn't like the way someone is responding to him, he will punish them in these very kid-like ways, and it's not pleasant for anyone involved. But because it's a kid thing, we get Joe Dante taking us into what is essentially cartoon world.
Yeah.
Like it's a kid who like, but it's completely demented. Like the thing that sticks with you in terms of horror, like there's a famous shot in this of a giant monster rabbit coming out of a hat. That is one of the most enduring images from this whole movie. But the thing that sticks with me the most is the kid's name is Anthony, and when we meet his family, they are all completely terrified. They look like they haven't slept in 3 years. They are
Yeah.
just so like, because they hang on his every emotion.
Mhm.
And as someone who just wrote a book with just released a book with a kid narrator, I'm curious, like, do you feel like the sort of kid-based magical thinking of this story stuck with you in a big way?
Oh yeah, no, the Anthony has influenced my life with writing more than anything else I've ever encountered, Like someone else I can imagine citing like Halloween or something or Scream or something, but I don't know. Did the segments have names actually, by the way, or is it just segment three?
I don't know if they're named in the credits or not. I can't remember, but
Yeah, I can't remember either right now, but let's call it It's a Good Life for now, or
yeah.
Anthony. That's Oh my God, because that was the one, that's the segment that said anything goes. Anything is allowed. Anything that you can think of, just like anything Anthony can think of, goes. You as the author, like, and not to mention, I probably have, and there's a graphic novel that I haven't really announced yet that is about a parapsychologist who invites he suspects that these two kids have some ESP in them and invites them to his lab and home to study them, not aware that they're actually capable of anything, like gods. And that's obviously, I'm not sitting there saying, "Oh, how could I write about Anthony or something?" But obviously that's inspired, or there's a direct line there. And there's numerous. numerous stories of mine where I'm like, oh, again, you know what's the scariest thing I can think of is like someone who like anything they think happens, and then like, but what if they like that includes like worries or whatever? I mean, it's just that blew the like you got to remember before this, any movie I saw was like not fantastical. Well, cartoons, I guess, but
Yeah.
like in terms of like a real life action movie and the practical effects in this thing, the rabbit out of the hat,
Oh, it's
this
amazing.
sister's mouth that's gone. Even just the freaking hallways upstairs and like the colors of the home and the colors of what his family is wearing. Uncle Walt's reaction to to being told to do the hat trick and like ripping sweat. Oh yeah, yeah, sure. I'll just do the hat trick. And they're all like, "Ah!" And you're 11 years old, you're like, oh my God, what's he gonna pull out of the hat? It's so well done. I didn't know what you said, that there was that freedom to him and George Miller, and it's so obvious.
Yeah.
They're so because these two segments are so artfully done. I mean, they're if they weren't the budget they are, the angles and the editing and like the music when it comes in and out and the decisions could be like art house segments. I mean, the Anthony segment is wild. And like last night it struck me, and it's never struck me before, is how that segment really, what's her name? Helen, is really about how Helen, like who she is,
Hmm.
because all these other people also had been, he coerced them into his life, into their home, and now you're gonna play sister, you're gonna play mom, you're gonna play dad, right?
Yeah.
And but Helen, he doesn't feel like he wants to do that with. Maybe he's a little bit older now, or Helen's just such a earnest, honest person that he doesn't want to be that way with her.
Yeah, there's a really interesting psychological. That's the other amazing thing about the segment is it looks like Tex Avery by way of German expressionism. Like it's so weird and creepy and full of it really feels like anything could jump out and hit you at any moment. But you have Kathleen Quinlan who plays this school teacher named Helen who's just passing through and makes friends with Anthony and goes back to his house and tries to exert some like adult in the room influence over him, and all these other adults are there going like, you can't tell him what to do, don't even suggest that you're going to tell him what to do. And Anthony says something that makes the segment so much more emotionally resonant, which is he says, I just want people to not be afraid of me,
Yeah.
because he's a little kid and like he didn't ask for this power that we know of, it's just a thing that he has. And he says like, I just want someone who's not afraid of me. And because she's a school teacher, or because she's a just a smart woman, or maybe because she has this unexplored darkness in her that we don't really know about, Helen, for lack of a better word, solves the story by saying, I want to be your teacher, like
Right.
let's
Right.
spend time together, and I won't be afraid of you because I want to learn from you and I want to teach you. And they have this moment, and it's really interesting because for me, I don't really know if she's saying that because she knows that she can use him, or if she's saying that because she's genuinely curious, or if she's saying that because she sees a child in need of help and wants to help him. There is such an interesting uh ambiguity to the way they resolve that in my
I,
mind.
okay, totally. But it feels like the obvious answer is helping a child in need or the teacher nurturer angle.
Yeah.
It's just a freaking little bit of what can I do with this kid? What can I do with this in my life? You know what I mean? Like, oh my God, this guy can do anything and he respects me. Come with me, kid. A very, very little, like a dollop of it. Just enough where you brought it up. An interesting thing that I did not know, and you probably did, this is unbelievable, is that Anthony at some point, dear listeners, at some point, Anthony says to his sister, I wish you into cartoon land, and sends his sister into the freaking TV, the cartoon, and horribleness ensues. The weird thing is that sister went on to voice Bart Simpson and still does now. So
Yeah,
she's still in cartoon land.
still.
She still is. Anthony
It's
wished his sister into cartoon land, and she's still there now. What's that person's name? What's her name?
Nancy Cartwright. Yeah,
Nancy Cartwright. Nancy Cartwright is still in the Twilight Zone movie right now.
still. Like, yeah, he wished her into cartoon world, and like 4 or 5 years later, she got that gig and still has it, and has more money than God now, I'm sure. But
Yeah, well, see, she was it's a good thing that she ran into Anthony.
yes, exactly. Um, another interesting side note, that episode, It's a Good Life, in the diner scene that opens it, one of the guys, not the guy who pushes Anthony down, but the other guy, is Bill Mumy, who played Anthony in the original Twilight Zone episode and went on to play uh
Oh, really?
oh gosh, he's on Babylon 5, and I can't remember the name of
Wait,
the
wait,
name of the
wait. The
character.
guy sitting at the counter is sort of blondish or whatever,
Yeah,
sitting.
the smaller guy.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Oh my God. Oh my God.
I
That's
have to
wild.
look up I have to look up the character name on Babylon 5 because it's going to drive me absolutely insane. Lanier. Yes, the Minbari, the assistant to the Minbari ambassador. So yes, that is Bill Mumy. He played Anthony in the original show, and there is actually a sequel when UPN rebooted the Twilight Zone in like around the turn of the millennium. They made a follow-up called "It's Still a Good Life," where Bill Mumy is back, and Cloris Leachman, who played his mom, is also back.
What?
Um, yeah, it's a
I
sequel.
am writing this down right now.
It is the only Twilight Zone episode, as far as I know. Yeah, the 2002 series, It's Still a Good Life. Bill Mumy and Cloris Leachman are both in it, and it's like Anthony has grown up and has a daughter who has similar powers. Um, I wrote about this for Sci-Fi Wire because it's the only Twilight Zone episode that has a sequel that's like in the same franchise.
My question is, and because I cannot express this enough, listeners, viewers, listeners, people of the audience, how profound this segment was to me. Like to me, I wrote on Twitter last night, I showed like a screenshot. I'm like, this is my Mozart. I mean, the Anthony segment, it opened every door for me as a fan, as a creative. I mean, every element, the editing, the music, the cartoon music throughout. What
Yeah,
about that? Like the card, and that was my first, now we see often in a movie like the record player plays and in like old timey or tiptoe through the tulips during Insidious, that kind of thing.
yeah.
But this was my first encounter with that kind of thing, where it was like again, I'm 11 or whatever, 10, cartoon music over this. It was like a combination. Like my mind was like, this is unbelievable. Like, it was unbelievable. Like every creative, my mind, it was like it was like my uncle like opened doors I just didn't even know were in the room. And so my question is, and I'm sure I can find this out, like, did Joe Dante write all? Who wrote this? Like, who visioned what we saw there? Is that all Joe Dante?
I think who wrote this? We're gonna
Feels
find
like
this
it
out right
feels like a
now.
group effort to me. It feels like
It was Richard Matheson.
he wrote the segment.
Yes.
Oh my God.
He wrote a couple of the segments, including the one we're about to talk about. And Richard Matheson, for those who don't know, was one of like the three most prominent Twilight Zone writers, other than like Rod Serling and Charles Beaumont. He was the main guy. He wrote
Oh God, do I love Charles Beaumont, by the way.
yeah,
But
Charles Beaumont wrote amazing stuff, but Richard Matheson wrote like Little Girl Lost and Nightmare at 20,000 Feet, which we're about to talk about, and a bunch of other stuff. Like there are like almost 20, I think, Twilight Zone episodes that he wrote. And yeah, he wrote this segment. And Joe Dante, I think all of the like cartoon stuff, so much of the design and the
right.
pacing and the way that like cartoon dialogue from the TV is incorporated into the thoughts of the characters during the conversations. I feel like that's Dante. That has a very Joe Dante, playful black comedy feel to it. Um, so yeah, that's what I think. And by the way, this is neither here nor there, but if you like Joe Dante movies and you haven't seen The Burbs, everyone go watch The Burbs. The Burbs is great.
Yeah, masterpiece. I mean,
Yeah.
dude, he has like The Burbs, Inner Space, Gremlins, Piranha. I know there's another one I'm forgetting right now, another huge
The
one.
Howling.
Howling.
Yeah,
I
The
mean,
Howling.
this dude's career, man, holy shit. And I count Anthony, I mean, again, it may be my favorite moment in horror history. It's also my first.
Wow. Well, this brings us to my favorite segment. I love the Anthony segment, but my favorite is the closer, which is
Oh, so good.
big bad George Miller coming in from Australia and delivering a remake of one of the most famous Twilight Zones, Nightmare at 20,000 Feet, which is, I think, wonderful in its simplicity because it's very simple. There's a guy, and it was William Shatner in the original show. It's John Lithgow in the movie. There's a guy who's afraid of flying. He's a nervous flyer. They make him sit down in his seat because there's a storm and there's turbulence. So he's sitting down and he's trying to calm down and he looks out the window and he happens to have one of those seats where he can see over the wing and he sees this creature out on the wing messing with the plane. And he keeps trying to tell everybody there's something out there messing with the plane, and no one believes him. And it is just like, that's it. That's the whole, we're going to work with this for 25 minutes or whatever it is.
For sure.
And it is a wonderful exercise in like, we've all been on planes where we've seen that one person and wondered, are they going to be the reason this plane has to make a emergency landing? Are we going to have a problem, or are we going to be okay in the air? And I think we can all kind of relate to that, but we can also all relate to that feeling, that gut feeling that something is just wrong and other people won't listen to us. And that too, like, the other thing about this movie is it's rated PG. Like, it was aimed at families. It's not a hard R. I don't think the PG-13 rating existed yet when this came out. I'm not quite sure. Like, it was around the same time, but it is a movie intended, like, they wanted 12-year-olds and 13-year-olds and people like that to watch this movie. So it has that feeling of, like, you ever have that feeling of being terrified by something and no one else thinks it's scary? And that's what this one is, and that sticks in my head the most about it. And plus John Lithgow is just incredible, off the walls batshit in this segment.
Incredible. This segment is like operatic to me. Between there's a stretch, there's a stretch where it's all like a static shot from the aisle, and he's already had trouble saying something's out there, and then they give him a red blanket and he puts the pillow and he's like trying to like kind of fall asleep and the camera's just on him, and finally he's like, and he reaches like for the window and then the music like the music starts and he's like no, and he's like trying to fall asleep and he's just facing the camera with his eyes closed. It starts to zoom in and he opens his eyes and looks at the camera, and it's the sort of dead, like, I've made a decision that I'm not going back on look. It's like the look of someone who's like, no, I'm looking out the window again. And then he looks out the window and all hell breaks loose. And it's that segment is like opera. Lithgow is unbelievable. George Miller's unbelievable. The music, the color with the red blanket and the white pillow and I mean everything about it. This whole segment hits the ground running, and it just never lets up. It's tense. The very first thing is him. It's like a distorted view of him in the airplane bathroom, like either taking pills or something, or like freaking out, losing his mind.
Yeah, he looks like he's tugging his hair out in tufts and
Yeah.
sweating on the floor of an airplane bathroom. And the flight attendants are trying to get him to come out so he'll sit down and hopefully calm down. And by the way, that moment that you were talking about, where he's just sitting there debating whether or not to look out, is my favorite moment, and partly because you see him deliberating with his eyes, but he also does this wonderful thing where the shade is down on the window, and he knows the shade is down, but he turns around and he looks at the window with the shade down, and he just touches it with two fingers for a second. Like, he has that moment of like, I can feel that this is going to be bad. And I'm
Yeah.
gonna try. I'm trying so hard to resist doing what I'm about to do.
Yeah, totally.
And it's remarkable. And it also has this interesting thing where the flight attendants do everything they can think of to try to get this guy to relax, to the point that a flight attendant sits down next to him and says, "I'm not supposed to do this, but I have sedatives. If you would like to just take some pills that I have personally on me from a stranger, you will calm down." And he goes, "No, I'll be okay. I'll be okay."
Yeah.
And he keeps, like, he is honest to God trying, and you get the sense that this is a guy who has been a problem on flights before and has been told that he's been a problem on flights before and is trying so hard to just, and as someone with anxiety, I feel this, like, there's this weird pressure when you're anxious about something. There's the anxiety about whatever the anxiety causing thing is, but then there's also that thing of, like, the pressure to just your body going, for the love of God, can you just be normal?
Yeah. Yeah.
Everyone else in this plane is just behaving like normal human people. Why can't you just calm down? And you can see him fighting that in his face.
Allison talks about what you're talking about. I'm an anxious guy too. And Allison talks about what you're talking about in such a great way where she's like, don't so you feel anxious, don't then feel embarrassed for feeling anxious and or angry or jealous of someone else for not being anxious or anxious for being anxious. All these thoughts, like then you're like dealing with numerous negativities at once. Just be anxious. She's like, just let that be like embrace it or something. Be anxious, but don't be embarrassed, because if you're embarrassed that you're anxious, you're going to be mad that you're embarrassed, and then you're going to be jealous of something. Now you got like a pile of negativity that you got to sift through to get down to the bottom, which is you just feeling a little anxious.
It is that feeling. It's like you're riding a unicycle and it's hard enough riding the unicycle, and then someone is tossing you knives to juggle. But you're also, it's amazing. Yeah, that's exactly the struggle, and it plays out so well. But the other thing that I love about this is, like you said, George Miller is all of the, like, over the top visual language that he puts in those early Mad Max movies
Yep,
is in this movie, is in this segment, but the only difference is, like, it just takes place within the cabin of an airplane.
yep.
Like, you see there are weird close-ups of people's eyes, like the camera does these crazy zooms and pans, and it's like whipping around this cabin because he wants to create that frenetic, like, how is this going to resolve energy? And it works so well because John Lithgow is so great at doing, like, big cartoon eyes. um he looks like a stop motion character because his eyes are so big and exaggerated.
He really
It's
does. And I think that's one reason why this segment pairs so well with Anthony is that Anthony, and what a brilliant idea having this segment last, by the way,
mhm.
is there's just that. I mean, I guess number one is one of the most famous Twilight Zone episodes, but number two, there's like a sense of like, we've seen the varieties of horror or what it can be, but hey,
Mm.
this is horror. There's a monster on the fucking airplane. It's like it ends with like boom, we were leading here the whole time, like to this, just like this is a horror story. And yeah, with like no goofing around, you know what I mean? This is scary shit. And
Yeah.
John Lithgow sells that. And again, when I was a kid, oh my gosh, and I had seen him before, in other stuff, and he always kind of comes out, he always came off as not anxious, but as like a thinker, an intelligent thinking guy. And so to see him, I showed Allison the movie, as I said, somewhat recently, and she goes, "Oh, no wonder you're scared to fly."
That's interesting. Like, are you, so you are scared to fly?
It's more like I get really nervous for like the build up to it.
Mm.
Like they're like, "Oh my God, we got to leave in a few days and we got to get there at this time and this." But once we're in the air, I'm just like having a drink and glad to be watching a movie and talking with Allison. So no, not once we're rolling, and I'm not afraid of takeoffs or landings, but the build up to the experience can be like yeah, like stifling or something. Yeah.
Yeah, flying doesn't make me anxious. Airports make me anxious. That's
Yes.
the
Yeah.
that's the
I'm saying.
secret is but it's this is so we were I was talking about weird passenger experiences, and I don't fly a ton. Like my wife flies more than I do because she's an event planner, so she occasionally has to go. And sometimes I go with her, sometimes I don't. But one time I forget where we were coming home to Austin, and it was still during the federal mandate to wear masks on planes. And there was this dude who got on the plane and tried to sit in our seats and then realized he had the wrong seat and sat in the row in front of us. And I like when the flight started, put my earbuds in and was listening to something and really wasn't paying attention to anybody else on this like 3 hour flight. And but I could hear this murmuring, and it was these other people in those seats in front of me talking to this guy, and there was something erratic going on and I couldn't guess what, and I kind of didn't want to know. I was kind of
Yeah.
doing ostrich, just like nope, nope, nothing happening there. And there at one point, another passenger yelled at him to put his mask back on because he kept pulling it off, and they kept telling him you have to have it on. And it was this whole thing. I was like, is this going to escalate? And thankfully it did not escalate, and we landed. And the funny coda to the story is we got in the car and I turned to Lyndsay, my wife, and said, that was weird, right? What was going on with that guy, I wonder? And she said, oh, he was checking into rehab when he landed back in Austin, and decided that the way he would deal with checking into rehab was to just get really, really high and have one last hurrah before. So he was on like a bunch of stuff,
Oh no.
and was just perceiving the flight differently from everyone else.
Yeah.
And I
Yeah.
was like, man, that is a recipe for seeing a monster on the wing. I'm
Yeah.
glad he didn't see that.
Well, one time, real quick, Alice and I were on a flight and we're about to take off, and suddenly up the aisle behind us, like a woman starts singing like some sort of like folk hymn song. Everyone else is silent. And then it's like, May the Lord take us up. And I'm like, wait,
Oh
what?
God.
I was like, Allison, I don't want to turn around. What is going on? I was imagining like a woman in like with like flowing blonde hair, like barefoot in a white robe or something. Like, I'm like, is there a cult on this plane? Like, what is going on? I started losing my mind. And Allison was like trying to like get a look, and she's like, no, it's just like I think it's just an older woman that's like a little nervous or something. And I'm like, okay, but I'm hearing like, may God carry us. And I was like, I'm like losing my mind, you know? Finally, the woman, like one of the dudes asked the woman to come forward. And then she was like standing right by me. And it was just like a woman that was like a little anxious. And she got through it by singing a little something. But without seeing her, I mean, this might have been like, she could have been a member of like the cult of plane death, you know? Like, I had no, like, my mind was like spinning, man, you know? But like, it's almost like, what's the scariest thing you can imagine is, yeah, someone busting out into like God, we are approaching God or something, music on a plane. I'm like, no. Sing something else, paperback writer, don't sing this.
Yeah.
And yeah, but in a general sense. So I just want, you know, people to know how this is how good those last two segments are of this movie. Is that there's only four segments, and as you heard in this talk, the first two, neither of us were crazy about either of the first two. So, but still, this movie's like a must see. So, what does that mean? That means these last two segments are so freaking good. It's just gonna blow your mind to anyone who hasn't seen it.
The last two segments combined with the opening
Yep.
are what you want. If you hear Twilight Zone movie made in the 80s,
Yep.
that's what you want it to be. The other two are sort of interesting experiments, and they're playing with different concepts of what the Twilight Zone is and was as a show, but those last two are just bangers. They're so wonderful. Um, and we're coming to the end of our time, but I did want to wrap this back around to we've talked about Anthony and the big influence it had on you. And we've talked about just the that feeling of anything goes and the many flavors of horror that applies to your work, and I your tastes as a reader and a viewer and everything. I also, for whatever reason, I was watching this movie last night and trying to think about it in terms of like, what do I know about Josh Malerman and the way that his work feels to me? And I don't know if this is a connection even worth making, but I thought about Daphne a lot because my favorite thing about Daphne is the way that it plays into that sort of urban legendy feel of the more you talk about it, the more it becomes true.
Mhm.
And Daphne is not a person so much as she's like a mind virus that can then affect you physically. And that feels very Twilight Zoney to me in general. Just the sense of like I could see a 30-minute Twilight Zone about like, oh, there's this crazy woman who will kill you with her bare hands and fold your body up in ways that you can't even imagine. But the secret is to not think about her. And it's the don't think of an elephant, but with a slasher. And that's one of the things I love about it. Um, I don't even know where I'm going with this necessarily, but I felt that connection. And I know we've already talked about the power of anything goes in horror. Um, do you feel that kind of thinking the way that the Twilight Zone works in terms of taking ordinary occurrences and applying this very sort of magical, almost dream logicy thing to them? Is that how you work?
Yeah, 100%. When I with Bird Box, I I imagine when as I was working on it, I can't remember who read it first and used the word like dystopian or whatever, like a friend or something. And I was like, this isn't an end. No, this isn't like an end times book. This is like the monsters are doing Maple Street. This is like we're contained in this house, and everyone's like, how do we deal with this thing that we can't even look out the window? Like to me, it was like I can almost see the book was black and white, like an episode of the Twilight Zone. And then the second novel I put out is a war story, which is would totally follow the monsters that do on Maple Street would be like a Rod Serling like war story. And
Yeah.
then the next one was a Western on Barry Carroll. And it's not just a matter, we've seen people a genre hop or whatever, or that kind of thing. But it really, for a long time, the books felt, and I suppose they still do, but Ghoul in the Cape kind of shook things up. But for a long time, the books all felt like the next episode in a show of which I'm the host. And I'm not coming out and having a cigarette and laying it all out for you, but I am the guy who wrote it, and I do see it this way. Like Daphne 100% would there's elements of like It's a Good Life and the anxiety from the airplane in Daphne. Carpenter's Farm, that's a book of mine that's just on my website, a whole novel. And it's about a guy who inherits a farm where personality traits grow. Well, and it's all just total mayhem from there. Because, well, you're telling me I could be funnier if I eat the humor in the backyard? All right, I'm gonna eat some humor, but then now I'm becoming a total asshole. Now I'm like so funny that I'm an asshole. So now I got to eat some like empathy. But now I'm like a floor mat because I'm like, and it asks the question, if your personality was taken apart, would you be able to put it back together again?
Yeah.
What percentage of you is funny? What percentage of you is jealous? What percentage of you is empathetic? No. And so, yeah, 100%. I can always trace it back to this movie and to the Twilight Zone. But I don't, I'd like to think I've read hundreds of books since and seen a gazillion movies. I'd like to think that I'm not just these four segments in this amazing wraparound, but it is the diving board I dove off. And my uncle, one day I'll ask him, and I doubt he'll even know, or maybe he will. One day I gotta ask him. I gotta be like, why did you show me that movie? What did I say that you were like, yo, Josh, I think that you're gonna like this? Because he was probably only, let's see if he was probably only, 35 at the time or something. He was like a young dude himself, He was probably like, oh, Josh, man, you're gonna love this movie. Why? Why'd you say that? How did you know? Changed my entire life.
Uncles everywhere, and I am one of them. Just remember that the movies you show your nephews could create the next Josh Malerman if you make the right choice. I feel like that's a wonderful place to wrap up. Shout out to Josh's uncle. Josh, before we let you go, let the people know what you have going on, where they can find you online.
Well, like I just mentioned, the website it used to be boring, but it's pretty awesome because of that book. I mean, Carpenter's Farm, it's just sitting there. There's no you don't have to, it's just for free. A whole novel. It's longer than Bird Box, Daphne. I'm also on Twitter and all that, but I think for something fun, go to that website. And I also wanted to point out that this is we could talk for an hour on this, but I'll just throw it out there. Next year I have a nonfiction book coming out as well as a documentary that I made. So next year is sort of the nonfiction year for me. But when I say nonfiction, don't mistake that as me having done any research. I'm not that kind of guy. like please don't. But yeah, so that's exciting. And that also adds to like that. There we're talking about that elasticity of the genre, right? Like I'm have no qualms about, okay, now following incidents around the house, now let's do a nonfiction book. Why? Well, because Anthony was nothing like the Scatman Crothers segment. That's why. And
What's
because
the
you know, you know,
Yeah? What's the subject of the nonfiction book?
in a nutshell, the book is called Watching Evil Dead. And it's a night 12 years ago that Alice and I had where her and I were just new to each other. And I got a book deal a couple months after meeting her, and she had never seen The Evil Dead. And we go to her cousin's house, and he is in a relationship that was like their last night. Like they were dying, that relationship, and we were brand new. And I had a book deal, and we're watching I'm standing at the head of a career, and I'm watching the first movie from Sam Raimi, and we're all getting drunk and high and dying of love, new love. And it was just such an amazing night that the next morning I said to Allison, oh man, I could write an entire book about last night. And 12 years later, I did.
Okay, well, we're gonna have to carve out some time to have you back on and talk about that because that sounds amazing. And as an Evil Dead fan, I can't wait to read that. Our guest has been Josh Malerman. Josh, it was a joy to talk to you. Thanks for being on the show.
Yeah, that was completely awesome. And also you had, I mean, you always are like this, but you had some awesome insight that I hadn't thought of with this movie. Like everything you said was like, oh shit, yeah, that was really awesome to go through this with you. That was great.
Thanks once again to Josh Malerman for being on the show. And seriously, if you have not read Incidents Around the House yet, it is one of the best horror novels I've read in a really long time and one of the most frightening. So definitely go check that out. Head over to joshmalerman.com for all your Josh Malerman needs, including, as Josh mentioned in our chat, Carpenter's Farm, a complete serialized novel that you can read for free right now on his website. We're looking forward to having him back too. I really want to talk more about the Evil Dead now that he mentioned that nonfiction project he's working on. For more from us, you can follow us on social media. We are at Scares Shaped Us on Twitter. We are at Scares Shaped Us on Facebook. We are at Scares Shaped Us on Blue Sky now. We just got a Blue Sky account, and at Scares Shaped Us on Instagram. So all those places you'll be able to go find us, follow us, keep tabs on everything we're doing. You can also go to thescaresthatshapedus.com. That's where you'll find an archive of every episode we've done so far and any news about what we've got coming up. You'll also be able to find us on social media there and email us at scaresthatshapedus@gmail.com if you got questions, comments, suggestions, anything you want me to read or watch. I'm always happy to hear from y'all. That's it for us this week. We'll be back in 2 weeks with another brand new episode with a really fun guest. Until next time, take care of yourselves. I'm Matthew Jackson, and you've been listening to The Scares That Shaped Us.